It's just silly. But my big argument is, look, Donald Trump loves Javier Milei. He says, just as he wants to make the U.S. Great again, he says Milei will make Argentina great again. Well, so what is he going to do? Have a tariff against Argentina?
For this reason, are surprised by the results and therefore call it a miracle. Assume that tomorrow they will call this the Argentine miracle, just as...
So it's always possible to criticize him. He should have done this. He should have done that in a different order. Who cares about that? The man is I'm never tired of saying he's magnificent. He's my hero. I'm honored that he regarded me as one of his mentors.
No hay almuerzo gratis.
Hello, people. Welcome to No Free Lunch. What a program we have today. We have Luis, we have Mariana, we have Seba, let's say the stable cast. And we have here a boy, a kid who is starting to get acquainted with this libertarianism thing. I think he is a promising kid. You tell me. I invited him to give his opinion. Thanks for joining us today, Walter. We're going to start this episode with a quote. My prediction is that unless President Milei is somehow prevented from taking the steps he wants to take, Argentina will have spectacular economic growth, and there will be far more prosperity and optimism about the future than there has been perhaps in 100 years. These are the words of Elon Musk. Elon Musk is perhaps one of the most powerful people in the world in every sense. To his economic might, he now adds political might, and Javier Milei is an inspiration to Elon Musk. I say this for those who insist that this freedom moves forward. Milei's project is a neighborhood phenomenon. That's what they said, right? I am going to go over very quickly what it is that nobody is discussing. I don't want to get into figures or the detail. But yes, deregulation, it was done. People are very quick to forget things like, for example, the rent law, which was immediately abolished and that almost instantly tripled the number of units for rent. Liberalization in general of the market, drastic reduction of public spending, of state bureaucracy, of inflation. Now, let's say it, the ghost of hyperinflation does not scare anyone anymore. But there are many people who do not know what it is like to live under hyperinflation. We do know it at our age. We know it as Argentines. It put an end to the industry of street protests. Again, this kind of things, without going into detail. And now, in addition to that, there are economic results that are beginning to be seen. And here comes the first question for Walter. Could it be that the ideas of freedom have finally had their turn in Argentina?
I'm a big fan of Javier Milei, and my PhD dissertation at Columbia University was on rent control. So I would say that if all he did, nothing else, just rent control, he would be magnificent. Rent control is very important because people have to live somewhere. And if you have rent control, you'll have less housing. And if you have less housing, you'll have more homelessness or people doubling up and tripling up and living very poor lives. A lot of people think that rent control helps the renter. No, paradoxically, it doesn't help. It hurts. It helps people who are protected by rent control. But the point is, you have to ask, will a given policy mean more housing or less housing? If more housing, good. If less housing, bad. So look, your Aunt Tilly leaves you $10 million, and you can invest the $10 million in anything you want, in housing, in shoes, in cars, or whatever. But if there's rent control, you're less likely to invest in residential rental units. Now, if you want to invest in real estate, there's other kinds of real estate you can invest in. You can invest in a hotel, or a store, or a mall, or a shopping mall, or a factory. There's a lot of real estate you can invest in, and you will stay away from residential units because only residential units are controlled. Whereas if you build a factory, there's no rent control on factories, so you'll build a factory. So we'll be up to our armpits in factories and in stores, and we won't have residential housing. Well, that's no way to run a railroad if I can mix my metaphors here. So again, I come back to if that's all he did nothing else, he would be magnificent. Donald Trump didn't get rid of rent control. Donald Trump was in power for 4 years. He didn't get rid of rent control. Now, I'm a big fan of Donald Trump. Don't get me wrong. I certainly compare to Kamala Harris, socialist. But he didn't get rid of rent control. Bless him. Javier Milei got rid of rent control. This is just amazing and magnificent. But it's only the tip of the iceberg. Because as you said, not only did he get rid of rent control, but he reduced spending, he reduced regulation, he reduced inflation. He is trying to get rid of interferences with free trade, tariffs, and stuff like that. Which leads me to another issue. One of the things, I'm a big fan of Donald Trump. Don't get me wrong. In 2016, when he ran for office in the first time, I started 2 groups with colleagues. One was Libertarians for Trump, and the other was Scholars for Trump. Now, I'm a libertarian, so I want people to vote for the Libertarian Party. And in the United States, there are red states and blue states and purple states. A red state is somewhere where Donald Trump is going to win big, like Texas. A blue state, he's going to lose big, California, Massachusetts. So I said to libertarians, look, in California, vote for the Libertarian because Donald Trump is going to lose big and he doesn't need your vote. In Texas, also vote for the Libertarian because Donald Trump doesn't need your vote. He's going to win big. However, in the purple states, like Pennsylvania, Ohio, a few others, it's going to be very close. And there, vote for Donald, even though you're a libertarian. And my second group I started with Donald Trump was Scholars for Trump. Why Scholars for Trump? Because the left wing said only rednecks and idiots would vote for Donald Trump. So scholars means you have to have a PhD. And I got 250 PhDs who supported Donald Trump. And I got maybe 10,000 libertarians who joined up in this Libertarians for Trump. So I'm a big fan of Trump, but I'm not a big fan of tariffs. I'm an economist. Most economists, now look, I don't mind if Donald Trump wants to use a tariff as a weapon. Let's say Mexico is sending too many people to the United States, and better than bombing Mexico is to use a tariff. But that's a political issue. From an economic point of view, tariffs are just silly. They violate free association and specialization and division of labor. It's just silly. But my big argument is, look, Donald Trump loves Javier Milei. He says just as he wants to make the U.S. Great again, he says Milei will make Argentina great again. Well, so what is he going to do? Have a tariff against Argentina? This is highly problematic to be polite. So Milei is also reducing tariffs. In other words, he is trying to do everything all across the board to promote Murray Rothbard's view of libertarianism, free enterprise, limited government. Okay, forget about the anarchism. I mean, that's sort of poetic. I mean, it would be nice, but and then people don't appreciate how hard it is for one man in Argentina to do all this because there's opposition in Argentina. He just can't press a button and do whatever he wants. He has a Congress. He has critics. He's doing the best he can. He's imperfect. Nobody's perfect. He's an imperfect person. And this leads me to this guy, Hans Hoppe, who is a bitter critic of Milei. And he doesn't appreciate how much of an uphill battle it is for Milei to do anything in Argentina.
Walter, I wanted to say about that because we have some breaking news from 4 days ago in a podcast called La Misa in Argentina. Milei responded that this fellow Hoppe, it was shameful, the declarations that he made against me in a press conference, because he may be a very good philosophical anarcho-libertarian, but as a monetary economist, he is an imbecile. If I had done what he suggested, just closed the central bank when there was an artificial pegging rate with the dollar, and then I would have had hyperinflation, then they would have ousted me from power immediately. also he attributes to me as if I had imperial powers to change everything at will when I have very limited powers. So yes, I think that we all love Milei, but it is sad that those who are not showing the love seem to be bitter critics indeed, because what he was suggesting, Hoppe, who is also an Austrian economist, remember that Böhm-Bawerk appears in the bill of Austria, in the old bills, because thanks to him, Austria prevented having a hyperinflation like that of Germany, that of the 1920s, 1930s Germany, that ultimately led to the election of the guy with the mustache. And what Hoppe, the German, was suggesting is that Milei make exactly the same mistake. Milei also mentioned that the former finance minister of the government who was running against him on the election was already planning to write a book on how Milei economics didn't work because they were already on a high inflationary environment when they took office. Now, I want to talk on the anarchist side, because the interview with Lex Friedman that Milei gave, he said, my goal is to every day go farther, closer to the goal of anarcho-capitalism, but I have to work within the constraints of the current laws.
No, I think you're absolutely right. To be fair to Hans Hoppe, he was not he didn't say Milei was awful. He said of all of the politicians now working, Milei is pretty good. But it was sort of damning with faint praise. That's the expression. I mean, this guy is a hero, Javier Milei, not Hans Hoppe. Javier Milei is a hero. We should be thankful to him. Yes, he's imperfect. He didn't do this, he didn't do that, but you got to give him 95 out of 100 or 97 out of 100 credit. But so Hans was improper in his criticism of him. He didn't say he was awful. He acknowledged he was among the best leaders now, but he's head and shoulders among any other leader anywhere in terms of free enterprise. He's head and shoulders over Donald Trump. He's head and shoulders over Bibi Netanyahu in Israel, who has also moved Israel from a socialist country when they started to a much more free enterprise country. So I would give Javier Milei marks as the best leader of any country in terms of promoting economic liberty. And Donald Trump and Netanyahu and a few others would come second after him. There's a whole other issue going on here, and that is Israel. Because not only is Javier Milei trying to make Argentina great, he is also a supporter of Israel against Hamas and the other terrorists. The point that I'm trying to make is that Hans Hoppe is bitterly opposed to Israel. And part of the reason, I surmise, I'm just guessing here, part of the reason that Hoppe is so critical of Milei on economics is because what's going on underneath the surface is Israel. Now, what happened was I'm a big supporter of Israel against Hamas, and Hoppe and a bunch of other people associated with the Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama, canceled me because I favored Israel, even though I've been involved with them for 40 years. So what I'm trying to say is that there might be some subterranean phenomenon going on here. Namely, Javier Milei is doing magnificently on Argentina economics. But he also favors Israel, and Hoppe hates Israel, and therefore hates Javier Milei for supporting Israel. And some of this comes out on the economics. In other words, if Milei was not a supporter of Israel, Hoppe might have been a little bit more supportive of Milei on the pure economics. So there's something really going on here, because a guy that gets rid of rent control, a guy that reduces government spending, a guy that reduces inflation, a guy that reduces regulation is magnificent. And to say anything other than he's magnificent from a libertarian point of view is very puzzling. So part of the explanation might be the Israeli kind of an issue.
I think that a lot of people, and this does not include Hans-Hermann Hoppe, regarding the average person, many are doubtful about the potential of an Argentina finally free from this enormous state, because they do not understand the basics of prosperity, these ideas that for us are almost common sense. I'm talking about things like private property, free trade, a fairly stable currency, and equality before the law. I believe that generally people do not see the connection between all of this, which they simply perceive as mere abstractions. Maybe they see these things as just nice abstractions. The link between these ideas and reality. What I'm trying to say is that it seems to me that people, for this reason, are surprised by the results and therefore call it a miracle. Let's assume that tomorrow they will call this the Argentine miracle, just as there have been many others referred to as economic miracles. Many people don't understand the foundations underlying what they call a miracle.
Well, Adam Smith wrote this book, and this will shock you, not you, but it will shock a lot of people. It's called The Wealth of Nations. And he asked, why is it that some nations are wealthy and other nations are not wealthy? And he rejected the idea of natural resources. Hong Kong doesn't have one natural resource to rub against another natural resource, and yet it was very wealthy. And then he talked about the intelligence of the people. Well, there were people who were very intelligent in England during socialism. Einstein was a socialist. He's very intelligent. Intelligence, who could be against intelligence? Who could be against raw materials? But the point is, these are not necessary, nor are they sufficient. What is necessary and sufficient is free enterprise and private property rights. This was the Adam Smith message. And there are many followers of Adam Smith, the Austrians, Milton Friedman, Friedrich Hayek, Bamba Burke, Menger, Mises, all sorts of people. It's not a miracle. It's just common sense. Why is it common sense? Because under free enterprise, all free enterprise consists of is voluntary interactions: buying, selling, renting, employing. Look, I bought this sweater here for $20, let's say. When I bought this sweater for $20, how much did I value this sweater at? Not 20, because then there'd be no profit in it for me. I valued it at more than 20, let's say 25. Well, then I made a profit of $5. You sold me this sweater. You have 100 of them. You're just dying to get rid of them. You might have valued it at $5, and you made a profit of 15. Every trade in the free enterprise system is mutually beneficial ex ante. Now, ex post, maybe I regret buying the sweater, who knows? But ex ante, necessarily, every trade, every interaction is mutually beneficial. I now hire you. I pay you $20 an hour. How much do I value your services? More than $20 an hour. Otherwise, I'm not paying you 20. How much do you value your leisure? Less than 20. So you make a profit. So all the free enterprise system is a concatenation of voluntary interactions. So this should be a miracle that it's beneficial? No.
I want to say here that in Costa Rica in the year 1950, after the Civil War of 1948, we abolished the armed forces. Not the obligatory military service, not a draft, the armed forces. And the budget allocation was directed to state indoctrination centers for children. But one thing that you can definitely say, and this goes back to Power and Market by Rothbard, is that the more the free market and the price mechanism and voluntary exchange, the process of social communication, coordination, and cooperation increases, the more overall peace, less aggression in society grows. And this is no small deal. I come from Costa Rica, which in the region of Central America has a higher standard of living only because it didn't go through the Marxist-Leninist insurrectionist movements of the rest of the region, like in El Salvador or in Nicaragua. So what increases peace in society is by definition good.
Absolutely. There's another aphorism. What is it? Something like, if goods can't cross borders, armies will. And this is part and parcel of what you're saying, that if we have free trade and peace, that's the way to prosperity. War is not a good way to prosperity. Now, you're talking about econometrics. One of my books was on economic freedom in the world. What we did is we compared the economic freedom in about 110 countries. Do you have free trade? How much regulation do you have? How big is your welfare? That would be less freedom. And then what we did is we asked, well, what's the per capita income of all these countries? And you're going to be amazed. I'm glad you're all sitting down. Otherwise, you're going to keel over. I'm kidding, of course. There was a very high positive correlation between economic freedom and per capita income. The richest countries were the most free, and the most free countries were the richest. So there's a lesson here that if you take over a country, you become the president, like Javier Milei in Argentina, and you want to have the country become richer, more prosperous, free up the economy. And not only is there a correlation between economic freedom and per capita income, there's also a positive correlation between economic freedom and the growth in per capita income. And that's even more impressive because the richer you are, the harder it is to grow percentage-wise. Whereas if you're very, very poor, you double your income, that's a big percentage increase. It doesn't mean much because you're starting at a very low level. So not only is economic freedom statistically correlated, and I would say causally connected to per capita income, but also to the growth in per capita income. So we have a recipe. It's as if Milei is a chef and he's cooking up a meal. And the meal is prosperity. Well, how do you put chicken, paprika, salt, pepper, what? Economic freedom. And that's what this man is doing. And I say bless Javier Milei because he is leading not only Argentina, but the whole world toward economic freedom.
I want to say one thing, though, before just to comment on that, the regulation bit. From the standpoint of the ethics of force, of that which is enforced by law, the more regulations and laws you repeal, the greater is the freedom of the people. I say this as someone who studied law. The more laws and regulations you repeal, the greater the freedom of the people. And then on the war point, yes, the taxpayer from Russia, the Ukraine, or the United States are not any richer from belligerent activity.
Well, look, we're not against law. There are certain laws that are justified. The law against murder, the law against rape, the law against theft. There are justified laws. We don't want to get rid of those laws. What we want to do is get rid of, for example, antitrust laws. The latest thing is that in the U.S., the two different banks want to merge, or two different airlines want to merge, and they won't let them. I have to tell you my monopoly joke. My monopoly joke is that if you're a businessman and you raise prices, you're guilty of profiteering. If you lower prices, you're guilty of predatory price cutting. And if you don't change prices, you're guilty of collusion. The point is, no matter what you do, they can come get you. This is lunacy, this kind of regulation. And one of the things that Milei is doing is getting rid of these stupid regulations and getting rid of regulatory bureaus and getting rid of bureaucrats. I mean, there are these people who are working in the Argentinian government, and I don't mean to pick on Argentina, the US, every country, and all they do is make it impossible, well, not impossible, make it more difficult for entrepreneurs to produce goods and services. And it would be much better, nowadays they're having this thing in the US, should the bureaucrats be made to come into the office? And I say, no, let them stay home and they don't do anything. Because when they come into the office, they start regulating. Now, even better is to fire them and let them get an honest job as a waiter or a shoe shine person or somebody working in a factory, instead of making it difficult for other people to produce goods and services. So to the extent that Javier Milei is not only reducing inflation and rent control, but also all sorts of business regulations, he is magnificent.
Since we are discussing how countries can prosper and escape poverty, I would like to ask your opinion regarding this. Do you think it all begins with the economy, like we talked about recently, the free market, less regulation, and related topics? Or is it more about a cultural change, meaning the cultural battle, where people change their mindset and lend their support to someone who promotes these ideas? As the saying goes, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Do you believe that it's a mix of both? What do you think, Walter?
Well, whenever I'm asked, do I want vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream? My answer is both.
That's what I thought.
I would say both. Do both. Education. I mean, I'm a professor. I'm a professor at Loyola University. By the way, I should put in an advertisement for Loyola University. If you're wanting to come and study with a free market economist, I'm always looking for good students. I don't mean you personally, but people who might be listening to this. So if you're interested in studying with me, I'd be happy to have you as a student. So I think you have to make inroads in all directions at the same time. You have to get rid of some of those Marxist professors who are promoting, socialism. Socialism doesn't work, and not only is socialism doesn't work practically, it's evil. It's an abomination ethically. So I think education is important, and I think deregulation is important. So it's not a matter of the chicken or the egg or which comes first. I think you try to make inroads in all directions. Look, I want to get rid of the minimum wage law because the minimum wage law creates unemployment for unskilled workers. And I want to get rid of tariffs. And I want to get rid of rent control because rent control ruins housing. Well, which one should I do first? I don't know. And if Milei does them in this order, and I'm a critic, I'll say, well, you should have done it in the other order. I don't know. These things are imponderable, and you also need to know more about the Argentinian situation than I do. I mean, I have general principles about free enterprise, but I don't know the specifics of Argentina. I don't know whether more effort should be put into getting rid of rent control or the minimum wage. It's easy to quarrel with Javier Milei and say, well, you should have done this first and that second, whereas you did that second and this first. That's just sort of silly. I mean, you have to do whatever you can do. And if there's in what is it, in karate, they tell you there are certain pressure points, like hit the person in the neck or hit them in the crotch, where the enemy is more weak, right? So what you have to do is wherever the regulators are the most weak, jump at them there. Wherever you think you can have a chance. Now, one of the first things he did was rent control. He must have thought something along the lines that I can get away with getting rid of rent control, whereas I can't get away with getting rid of the minimum wage right away easily. I'm just speculating. Well, if that's so, then go with rent control. On the other hand, to say, well, he shouldn't have done rent control first, he should have done tariffs first, or he should have done regulations first, this is just a silly criticism of this magnificent man.
I believe that there are many people who also find it difficult to conceive that a person with the correct ideas and perhaps with the right personality, as well as the boldness of someone the likes of Javier Milei has, can create the required conditions for a profound and lasting change. This would be the thesis defended by Samoburia, who is a sociologist from Eastern Europe. I cannot remember right this moment the specific country, the thesis of the light player, or even that of the great man theory. Perhaps it is true that at certain given moments, a single person, an individual, can change the course of a country's history and even the entire world. I don't want to elaborate too much on this, but what do you think about that?
Well, I think there's some truth in that. And I wanted to mention another great man, Ron Paul, who was also a politician. And I mean, he was a medical doctor, but forget about that. That's not relevant here. He is also a politician, and he's also a free enterpriser. He's also a great man, and he is responsible, I think, along with Ayn Rand, in creating more libertarians than any other person on the face of the earth. Well, what did Ron Paul do? Well, he didn't have as much power as Javier Milei. Javier Milei is the president. He was only a member of the Congress, not even a senator, only a member of the House of Representatives. But in so doing, he had a fulcrum, he had a megaphone with which he could promote liberty. End the Fed was something that is Ron Paul's middle name, if I can put it in those terms. So I think it's both. Again, if you ask me, do I want vanilla or chocolate ice cream, I'm going to say both. If you say, well, is it the great man or is it market forces? Both. I think there are great men. Murray Rothbard was a great man. And by the way, Javier Milei mentioned several people who are his mentors. One of them was Murray Rothbard. One of them, I'm honored to say, was me. One of them was Hans Hoppe, who sort of turned against them. Another one was, what's that guy from Spain? Oh, I forget his name. It's right.
Jesus Huerta de Soto.
Right, Huerta de Soto. I'm getting senile in my old age. I forgot his name. I'm a big fan of his as well. And this is very important. I don't know if he mentioned Ron Paul, but he could have easily have mentioned Ron Paul as another mentor of his, Javier.
I want to make a comment on this before we go on to the next question, which is, I think that it is particularly important to have a Javier Milei in the world after the years 2020 through 2022, and after Stefan Molyneux, who was a great popularizer of the anarcho-libertarian ideas, was deplatformed.
Yeah, that's horrible. This cancellation business. I've been victimized by that by the Mises Institute. I mean, I was friends with these guys for 40 years. They won't speak to me anymore. You know, that's sort of strange because we libertarians disagree on a lot of issues other than Israel. We disagree on abortion. Ron Paul is pro-life. Murray Rothbard is pro-choice. You can't get two more highly credentialed libertarians than Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard, yet they're 180 degrees apart. They can't both be right because they're on opposite sides. And yet abortion is a very important issue. And yet the issue of cancellation never arose. Nobody ever said that either one of them or both of them are not libertarians because they have different views. But on Israel, somehow you get this mishigas in Yiddish craziness, where somehow if you take the wrong step on Israel, you're canceled. So I agree with you that this idea of cancellation, you see, Hans Hoppe is most famous for his argument from argumentation ethics, which I support entirely. So here is a guy who supports argument and yet won't argue about Israel, which is very strange. So yes, I think great men are pivotal. Golda Meir in Israel, a great woman or a great person. Margaret Thatcher did something a little bit on the order of Javier Milei. She turned British socialism into something a little bit better. So there are people who are very important. And then there are market forces. And I would say, to answer the question, that both are important. And I'm not in a position to say which is more important.
Among liberals, there are many who, oddly enough, seem worried. Rather than celebrating all of this, as we are currently doing, they may think that if this whole experiment goes wrong, or rather, this is literally what they say, they claim that if this goes wrong, we liberals will subsequently be blamed for all the evils that may occur. They say that, and I usually respond, it doesn't matter, they're going to blame us for everything anyway. If this goes well, the socialists will say that everything actually went wrong, or that the good things were a product of randomness, and even if the enemies of freedom succeed in causing it to go wrong, they will blame us anyway. What I mean is that I believe it doesn't make much sense to worry about being blamed. Am I wrong here?
Well, I would say that if it fails, it's because it wasn't implemented. And if the Javier Milei policy fails, it's because it wasn't implemented. If it was implemented, it necessarily has to succeed. Necessarily, not just more likely. Because what we're talking about from an Austrian praxeological point of view is a synthetic a priori statement. I mentioned it before when I bought the sweater for $20. I necessarily valued it more than $20, otherwise I wouldn't have bought it. If I valued it at 10, I wouldn't have bought it. I would have lost money. If I valued it at 20, I wouldn't have bought it because what's in it for me? I wouldn't have made any gain. So I necessarily gained. And yet all the free enterprise system is a concatenation of these kinds of things: buying and selling and renting and investing and employing and being an employer, an employee. So if the Javier policy is implemented, it will necessarily succeed, not just maybe. And the only reason it could not succeed is if it's not implemented. Maybe Milei will be, God forbid, assassinated. Maybe the Congress will impeach him and he'll no longer be the president, God forbid. Then he will not have succeeded. But he will not have succeeded, not because of any besmirchment of the free enterprise system, but because he was unable to implement the free enterprise system, which he is now doing. He is doing magnificently. Perfectly? No. Nobody does anything perfectly. So it's always possible to criticize him. He should have done this. He should have done that in a different order. Who cares about that? The man is, I'm never tired of saying he's magnificent. He's my hero. I'm honored that he regarded me as one of his mentors. I can't think of a better compliment ever than that. So I'm a big fan of his, and I wish him the best. And I would say that if he can implement his policies, Argentina will be made great again, in the words of Donald Trump. And not only, it's not only what he's trying to do is making Argentina great again, he's trying to make the world greater again. Because to the extent that he succeeds, and he's already succeeding, other countries will start saying, hey, maybe we should try a little free enterprise. And if other countries start a little free enterprise, we're going to have more prosperity. And not only more prosperity, but more peace, because the two of them go together, as we were discussing before. And then maybe we'll get to Mars, or we'll have a colony on the moon, or maybe we'll cure cancer or cure heart disease or something like that, because we'll be richer. And wealthier is healthier. And what he is doing is making us wealthier. And when you're wealthier, you can do more things, more good things. So I can't, I never tire of singing his praises. By the way, there are 5 of us here, and only one person hasn't spoken yet or asked a question or made a comment. So maybe it's his turn.
Luis, Walter has noticed how one of us hasn't yet taken a turn to ask a question, so it might be your turn to speak up. Do you have any comments, thoughts, or questions that you would like to share?
My vocabulary is very short, and I using my energy trying to understand you. Sorry.
Well, you can make a point in Spanish. You don't have to make it in English, and they'll translate it for you.
I would like to ask a question. Walter, regarding this, have you always thought this way? Or at some point, let's say, did you radically reject all political action? Have you changed your mind about this?
Yeah, well, what happened was I went to high school with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is a socialist senator in the United States. I'm sure everyone knows who he is.
Yes.
And we were on the track team together. My Bernie Sanders joke is that Bernie Sanders doesn't run away from much. He doesn't run away from socialism. He doesn't run away from ex-convicts voting. He doesn't even run away from convicts voting. But there's one person that he runs away from, and that's me. Why? Because we were on the track team together, and he was one of the best runners in the city. And we ran the same events, half mile and up. I never broke 5 minutes for the mile. He was doing 4:30 or something in high school. So we start off at the same starting line, and then he runs away from me. So I had the same views as him, socialism. And then Ayn Rand came to Brooklyn College to speak, and I came to convince her that socialism was the right way to go. And then she and her chief lieutenant, Nathaniel Brandon, converted me through 2 books. One book was Atlas Shrugged, and the other book was Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. 2 magnificent books. And then I became a free marketer. And then later I met Murray Rothbard, and then I became an anarcho-capitalist.
But so, I mean, as an anarcho-capitalist, did you have that position, some anarcho-capitalists who say that political action is immoral?
No, I don't think political action is immoral. Ron Paul is immoral because he was a senator. Javier Milei I ran for office. I ran for Assembly of New York State when I was in New York. And my motto was disassemble the assembly. The assembly was the lower house in New York State. I don't see anything wrong with running for office. I'm a member of the Libertarian Party in the US and in Canada. I also am a citizen of Canada. So I don't think there's anything wrong with political action. I mean, if there was something wrong with political action, Javier Milei would be an economist, not a senator and not a president. Ron Paul would be a doctor. No, I don't see anything wrong with political action. Murray Rothbard used to say, look, the average person is interested in beer and bowling and football, except every 4 years he turns his attention to politics. So why shouldn't we also, we libertarians, we free enterprises, why shouldn't we also try to promote liberty in that way? And I'm a big fan of the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party started in 1971. But in New York State, it started in 1969, and I was a member since 1969. So I'm a big fan of political action. I see nothing wrong with it, certainly nothing incompatible with anarcho-capitalism. Yes, if we anarcho-capitalists had our way, there'd be no more politics. But until then, I mean, does running for office per se violate the non-aggression principle? No. therefore it's legitimate. It's sort of like prostitution. Do I favor prostitution? No, I'm against prostitution. I don't think it's a nice way for people to interact. But should we put prostitutes in jail? No. So just because you want to legalize something doesn't mean you favor it, right? On drugs, I don't think people should use heroin and cocaine and stuff like that. I think it's very deleterious. The same thing with alcohol. I mean, we did have alcohol prohibition in the United States, and it was a disaster. We talked about crime just a minute ago. Well, one way to get rid of crime is to legalize alcohol. Another way is to legalize drugs. But it doesn't mean you favor alcoholism, and it doesn't mean you favor drug addiction.
These guys, what they say is that if you are a government, you are coercing people. So you are aiming for coercion. This is their argument, not mine.
Well, Ron Paul is not aiming for coercion. He's aiming in the opposite direction. Javier Milei is not aiming at coercion. He's aiming to reduce coercion. And how can he effectively reduce coercion? Well, there are many ways. He could write a novel like Ayn Rand wrote a novel. He could be an economist like I am and try to reduce coercion in that way. Or he could run for office and try to reduce coercion in that way. So I think you're quite right that the key is reducing coercion. And can this be done through the government? Yes.
Okay. Hold on, Seb. I think Luis already has a question.
Just as is the case with all politicians, there are things about Donald Trump that I like and things that I dislike. One which I do not like is his support for protectionist policies and his persistent threat to raise tariffs on other countries. Walter, do you think that Javier Milei's influence could ever change this proclivity of Trump's? Could Trump at some point, instead of threatening to raise tariffs, start lowering them or threaten some countries with lowering tariffs on his competitors?
I hope so. I think that's a very excellent point. I mean, Donald Trump likes Milei, and yet he's going to put a tariff on Argentina. He wants to make Argentina great again. Donald does, not just Javier. Donald wants to make Argentina great again, and he's going to make it great again by imposing a tariff on Argentina. To get to the point that you're making, some of my most recent op-eds have been, please, Donald Trump, change your mind on tariffs. Because he even went so far as to say tariffs are the most beautiful word in the English language. I don't go along with that. Obviously, there are many more beautiful words. Love, baby smile, sunset. Johann Sebastian Bach is more beautiful than tariffs. So I'm hoping that Donald Trump will be big enough to realize that he made a mistake. Look, we all make mistakes. Why shouldn't Donald make a mistake? So the key is, will he rectify this mistake? And I hope and pray, if I were a praying man, that Donald Trump would rethink his opposition to tariffs from an economic point of view.
Amen.
I mean, look, if tariffs were so great, I'm in Louisiana. Why don't we Louisianans have a tariff against Iowa corn? And then I'm from New Orleans. Why don't we have a tariff against Baton Rouge products? And then you get back to, you lose out on specialization and division of labor. The reason that the U.S. is so rich, relatively speaking, is because it's a gigantic free trade area.
It's like that.
There is no tariff between Massachusetts and Texas. And if tariffs was such a great idea, we should have internal tariffs.
Yeah.
But internal tariffs are preposterous. And and I shouldn't trade with you. I should be self-sufficient. Well, if we were self-sufficient, we'd all die, or 99% of the people would die. So the case for tariffs is just silly. The economists have sometimes taken a survey. Where is the most agreement among economists? And there are three areas: tariffs, minimum wage, and rent control are the areas where economists mostly coalesce. It's sort of economics 101. Absolute advantage and comparative advantage is just tariffs are silly. Look, I promised you guys 1 hour, and it's now 1 hour, and this was a pleasure. And I hope you invite me back in a couple of weeks or a month or so. I'd love to do it again, but I got to get off now. But thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for this enormous honor of joining us once again.
We appreciate you being with us.
Thank you. Take care.
It was an honor.